The arrival. The skies over Earth darkened as the massive Zarkonian warships entered the atmosphere. Their sleek obsidian hulls reflected the panicked faces of humans below, who stood frozen in disbelief. This was no Hollywood blockbuster. The alien invasion humanity had long speculated about was now a terrifying reality. Commander Xylos stood on the bridge of the flagship, his four eyes narrowing as he surveyed the primitive planet below. His mandibles clicked in what passed for a smile among his species. "Pitiful," he muttered, his translator converting the clicks and chirps into recognizable speech for his crew. "These humans won't even provide a challenge. Prepare the landing parties." On the ground, chaos reigned. In New York City, traffic ground to a halt as people abandoned their vehicles, fleeing on foot. The wail of sirens mixed with the screams of the panicked populace. Similar scenes played out in cities across the globe: London, Tokyo, Mumbai, Rio de Janeiro, as the Zarkonian ships took position over major population centers. In Washington, D.C., President Elena Rodriguez sat in stunned silence as her advisors shouted over each other in the Situation Room. General Marcus Stone, his face ashen, delivered the grim news. "Madam President, our military response is ineffective. Our most advanced fighter jets are being swatted out of the sky like flies. Missile strikes aren't even scratching their ships' hulls." Rodriguez closed her eyes, the weight of humanity's fate pressing down on her shoulders. "What about our nuclear arsenal?" The room fell silent. Stone cleared his throat. We launched 2 ICBMs at the ship over Moscow. They detonated harmlessly against some kind of energy shield. The EMP didn't even disrupt their systems." As the gravity of the situation sank in, Xylos's voice boomed from every electronic device on the planet, a demonstration of the Zarkonians' technological superiority. "People of Earth, your planet is now under the control of the Zarkonian Empire. Resistance is futile and will be met with swift termination. Surrender, and you may be allowed to live as servants of the Empire." The message repeated in every language, leaving no doubt about the aliens' intentions. Panic turned to despair as military bases worldwide reported the same results. Conventional weapons were useless against the invaders. As the first wave of Zarkonian ground troops deployed, they encountered little organized resistance. Their biomechanical battle suits, impervious to bullets and explosives, allowed them to march unimpeded through the streets. Plasma weapons cut through barricades and vehicles with ease, leaving smoldering wreckage in their wake. Xylos watched the initial reports with satisfaction. "As expected," he mused, "these humans are even more primitive than our scouts reported. They cower and flee rather than fight." His second-in-command, Vexus, nodded in agreement. "Indeed, Commander. At this rate, we'll have full control of the planet within days." However, as the Zarkonian forces pushed deeper into human territory, they began to encounter something unexpected. In a suburb of Chicago, a group of civilians had overturned a fuel tanker, creating a flaming barrier that forced a Zarkonian squad to detour. It was a minor inconvenience, but it caught Xylos's attention. "Curious," he muttered. "They're using their environment against us. Primitive, but interesting." Similar reports began to trickle in from other invasion sites. In Paris, civilians had used construction equipment to create impromptu barricades, slowing the alien advance. In Sao Paulo, a quick-thinking group had used industrial coolant to freeze the ground, causing several Zarkonian walkers to slip and crash. These were not coordinated military actions, but spontaneous acts of resistance by ordinary people using whatever they had at hand. Xylos dismissed them as desperate, last-ditch efforts of a doomed species. Yet a seed of doubt began to grow in the back of his mind. As night fell on the first day of the invasion, humanity teetered on the brink. Governments were in disarray, militaries were overwhelmed, and millions were displaced. But in the shadows, in basements and back alleys, a spark of resistance was being kindled. In a New York subway tunnel, a group of strangers huddled together. sharing information and resources. A retired engineer sketched plans for improvised weapons on the back of a subway map. A chemistry teacher listed household chemicals that could be combined into explosives. A Parker enthusiast described ways to navigate the city unseen by the alien patrols above. Similar scenes played out across the globe. Humanity, backed into a corner, was doing what it did best: adapting, improvising, and preparing to fight back with everything it had. As Tylos retired to his quarters that night, feeling confident in the inevitable victory to come, he had no idea that the real battle for Earth was just beginning. The humans, it turned out, had a secret weapon: their boundless creativity and the ability to turn anything into a tool of resistance. The Zarkonians had come expecting to find prey, but they were about to discover they had stumbled into a nest of hornets. The invasion of Earth was not going to be the simple subjugation Tylos had anticipated. It was going to be a war unlike any the Zarkonian Empire had ever fought. A war where everything was a potential weapon, and every human a potential soldier. As the first day of the invasion came to a close, both sides prepared for what was to come. The Zarkonians, confident in their superior technology and military might. The humans, driven by desperation and the will to survive, ready to fight with anything and everything at their disposal. The stage was set for a conflict that would determine the fate of humanity and challenge the very foundations of the Zarkonian Empire. The war for Earth had begun, and it was about to take a turn that neither side could have predicted. The first stand. Dawn broke on the second day of the Zarkonian invasion, casting an eerie light over the changed landscape of Earth. Smoke rose from the ruins of once bustling cities, and an uneasy silence hung in the air. But beneath the apparent calm, a storm was brewing. In the suburbs of Seattle, Sarah Chen, a former software engineer, crouched in her garage, surrounded by dismantled electronics and improvised gadgets. Her fingers flew over a keyboard connected to a mess of wires and circuit boards. Come on," she muttered, her eyes glued to a flickering screen. Suddenly, the screen lit up with a grid of the local area. Dots representing Zarkonian troops blinked steadily. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. She had successfully hacked into the aliens' communication network using nothing but scavenged electronics and her own ingenuity. "They're not as unhackable as they think," she whispered, reaching for her jury-rigged radio. "Resistance base, this is Hacksaw. I've got eyes on the enemy. Time to spring the trap." Across town, in what used to be a high school gym, Jake Martinez, a former wrestling coach, received Sarah's message. He turned to the ragtag group of civilians gathered around him. "All right, people, this is it. Remember, we're not soldiers, but that doesn't mean we can't fight. Use everything and anything you can. Let's show these aliens what humans are made of." As the Zarkonian patrol moved through the quiet streets, they remained oblivious to the ambush being prepared. Humans emerged from hiding spots, armed not with guns, but with an assortment of everyday objects transformed into weapons. The attack began with a barrage of homemade projectiles. Water balloons filled with paint obscured the aliens' visors, while others contained a sticky mixture that gummed up their suit joints. Potato guns, modified to shoot metal scraps, peppered the invaders with surprising force. Confused and disoriented, the Zarkonians struggled to regroup. They had expected cowering humans, not this coordinated assault. As they tried to use their advanced weapons, they found them malfunctioning, thanks to Sarah's electronic interference. Jake led a group armed with improvised melee weapons, baseball bats wrapped in barbed wire, sledgehammers, and even a nail-studded cricket bat swung into action. The aliens' armor, designed to withstand energy weapons and bullets, proved less effective against blunt force trauma. From windows and rooftops, others joined the fray. A group of chefs from a nearby restaurant lobbed Molotov cocktails made from bottles of high-proof liquor. A team of construction workers used their knowledge to collapse a weakened building onto a cluster of alien troops. The battle raged on, with humans using every trick and tool at their disposal. A group of skateboarders used their boards to trip up the aliens, while others lassoed them with steel cables, restricting their movement. Even the environment itself became a weapon, as fire hydrants were opened to flood the streets, shorting out the aliens' electrical systems. In his command ship, Thylos watched the unfolding chaos with growing alarm. "What is happening down there?" he demanded, his mandibles clicking furiously. "How are these primitives giving us such trouble?" Vexus, equally baffled, could only shake her head. "Commander, they're using everything as a weapon. Our troops are reporting attacks with objects they can't even identify. It's like the whole city is fighting back." Xylos slammed a clawed hand down on his console. "Impossible. Send in the heavy walkers. Crush this resistance." But as the massive four-legged war machines stomped into the city, they too fell victim to human ingenuity. Streets that looked solid gave way, revealing pit traps dug in haste and concealed with care. Tripwires made of piano wire and fishing line entangled the walkers' legs, while teams with welding equipment salvaged from construction sites worked to fuse joints together. In a particularly daring move, a group led by Elena Torres, a former Hollywood stuntwoman, managed to scale one of the walkers. Using thermite charges crafted from aluminum powder and iron oxide, they burned through the machine's neural control unit, sending it crashing to the ground. As the battle wore on, the Zarkonians found themselves increasingly outmaneuvered. Their superior technology, rather than being an asset, often proved a liability in the face of human unpredictability. Electromagnetic pulses cobbled together from microwave parts disabled alien equipment. Smoke from burning tires obscured their advanced sensors. By midday, the impossible had happened. The Zarkonian forces, for the first time since the invasion began, were in full retreat. As the last alien ship disappeared over the horizon, a cheer went up from the human defenders. They had done it. They had won their first victory. In the makeshift command center, Jake looked at the celebrating crowd with a mix of pride and somber realization. "This is just the beginning," he said to Sarah, who nodded grimly. "They'll be back," she agreed. "And they'll be angry. But now we know we can hurt them. We can fight back." News of the Seattle victory spread like wildfire across the globe. From the favelas of Rio to the streets of Mumbai, people began to realize that the aliens weren't invincible. Humanity had been bloodied, but it wasn't beaten. The spark of resistance, kindled in desperation, now roared into a flame of defiance. In cities and towns worldwide, people began to look at their surroundings with new eyes. Everything was a potential weapon. Every skill a possible key to survival. Garages became workshops. Kitchens transformed into chemistry labs, and public spaces turned into training grounds. The Zarkonians, reeling from their unexpected defeat, retreated to regroup and reassess. Thylos paced in his command room, his worldview shaken. These humans were unlike any species they had encountered before. They didn't fight like a military, yet they were more effective than many armies the Zarkonians had defeated. "We underestimated them," Thylos admitted grudgingly to Vexus. "Their adaptability, their creativity, it's unlike anything we've seen." Vexus nodded solemnly. "What are your orders, Commander?" Xylos' eyes narrowed, a new determination settling over him. "We adapt as well. Analyze every aspect of this defeat. I want new strategies, new technologies. We will not be humiliated again." As night fell on the second day of the invasion, both sides prepared for the battles to come. The humans, emboldened by their victory, knew that the war was far from over, but for the first time since the invasion began, they felt hope. The Zarkonians, shaken but resolute, began to realize that conquering Earth would be far more challenging than they had ever imagined. The stage was set for a conflict that would push both species to their limits, a war where ingenuity and adaptability would prove as crucial as any advanced technology. The battle for Earth had truly begun, and it promised to be unlike any conflict in the history of the galaxy. The adaptation. As the third day of the invasion dawned, both humans and Zarkonians found themselves in unfamiliar territory. The aliens, accustomed to swift victories, were forced to reassess their strategies. Humanity, meanwhile, was rapidly organizing its chaotic but effective resistance into a more cohesive force. In the orbiting Zarkonian command ship, Xylos convened an emergency war council. "Our standard tactics are failing," he growled, his frustration evident. "These humans are using methods we've never encountered. We must adapt or face defeat." Vexus, his second-in-command, stepped forward. "Commander, I propose we study their improvised weapons and develop countermeasures. We should also consider using smaller, more maneuverable units instead of our large war machines." Xylos nodded grimly. "Agreed. And we need to disrupt their communication networks. They're coordinating far too effectively for a species at their technological level." As the Zarkonians planned their new approach, humanity was undergoing its own transformation. In a repurposed bunker beneath the ruins of Berlin, Dr. Amelia Reinhardt, a renowned anthropologist, addressed a diverse group of resistance leaders via a secure, jury-rigged communication system. "What we're seeing is unprecedented in human history," Reinhardt explained, her voice tinged with both excitement and concern. "Global cooperation on a scale we've never achieved before. Former enemies are now allies, united against a common threat." On screens around her, faces from every corner of the globe nodded in agreement. There was Chen Wei, a Chinese hacker who had turned the Great Firewall into a tool for coordinating Asian resistance. Beside him, Oluwaseun Adelik, a Nigerian engineer who had transformed oil refineries into weapon factories, and dozens more, each bringing unique skills and resources to the table. "Our strength lies in our diversity," Reinhardt continued. "Each culture, each individual, brings a new perspective on how to fight these invaders. We need to share knowledge. Fast." And share they did. Over the next few hours, a global database of improvised weapons and tactics was born. Japanese martial artists shared techniques for taking down Zarkonian troops in close combat. Brazilian favela dwellers offered strategies for urban warfare. Australian Aborigines contributed survival skills for harsh environments. Meanwhile, in the streets and fields of Earth, the war raged on. The Zarkonians, adapting to human tactics, had ditched their large walkers for swarms of smaller, insect-like drones. But humanity had adapted too. In the streets of Cairo, protesters-turned-warriors used solar-powered electromagnets to disrupt the drones' navigation systems. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous tribes coded blow darts with a paralytic compound that could penetrate the aliens' breathing apparatus. Perhaps the most significant human adaptation came in the form of captured alien technology. In a hidden lab beneath the Louvre in Paris, Dr. Sophie Durand, a quantum physicist, worked tirelessly to reverse engineer a Zarkonian energy shield. "It's like trying to understand a computer with stone tools," she muttered, her eyes bleary from lack of sleep. "But we're making progress. If we can replicate even a fraction of their tech, we might stand a chance." The Zarkonians, for their part, were learning the hard way about human tenacity. In the highlands of Scotland, a Zarkonian scouting party found itself bogged down in a peat bog, their advanced sensors useless against the ancient landscape. Local farmers, armed with nothing more than knowledge passed down through generations, picked them off one by one. In orbit, Silos received the reports with growing concern. "They're learning, adapting faster than any species we've encountered," he said to Vexus. "Every defeat teaches them, makes them stronger." Vexus nodded solemnly. "Perhaps we should consider negotiation. These humans might be more valuable as allies than subjects." Xylos chittered in frustration. "The Empire does not negotiate with lesser species. We must find a way to break their will." But breaking human will was proving to be an impossible task. In fact, each Zarkonian attack seemed to strengthen humanity's resolve. The global resistance network grew stronger by the hour, with underground bunkers and hidden cities springing up worldwide. In one such hidden city, deep in the Rocky Mountains, Jake Martinez, the former wrestling coach from Seattle, was training a new batch of recruits. Remember, he shouted as they practiced disabling alien drones with makeshift EMP devices. They might have the technology, but we have the home field advantage. Earth is our turf. This sentiment was echoed across the globe. Humans were turning their intimate knowledge of their planet into a powerful weapon. In Siberia, resistance fighters used the harsh winter to their advantage, luring Zarkonian troops into icy traps. In the Sahara, desert nomads ran circles around the aliens, using sandstorms as cover for their attacks. As the day wore on, a new development electrified the human resistance. Dr. Durand, bleary-eyed but triumphant, made an announcement that would change the course of the war. "We've done it," she said, her voice crackling over the global resistance network. "We've managed to create a working prototype of the alien shield technology. It's crude, and it won't stop their biggest weapons, but it's a start." The news spread like wildfire, reinvigorating the human forces. For the first time, they had a defensive tool that could match the Zarkonians. It wasn't much, but it was hope. As night fell on the third day of the invasion, both sides found themselves in a war unlike any they had expected. The Zarkonians, despite their advanced technology, were bogged down in a conflict they couldn't seem to win. Humanity, despite being outgunned and outmatched, was holding its ground through sheer determination and ingenuity. In his command ship, Xylos stared at the blue planet below, a mix of frustration and grudging respect in his alien eyes. "Prepare for a full-scale assault," he ordered Vexus. "We end this tomorrow." But down on Earth, in bunkers and hideouts, in labs and workshops, humanity was preparing too. They had survived the initial invasion, adapted to the alien threat, and now stood ready to defend their home with everything they had. As both sides geared up for what promised to be the decisive battle, one thing was clear: the war for Earth was about to enter its most crucial phase. The fate of humanity, and perhaps the Zarkonian Empire itself, hung in the balance. Part 4. The Turning Point. The fourth day of the Zarkonian invasion dawned with an eerie calm. Both sides knew that this day would likely decide the fate of Earth. In the pre-dawn hours, Zarkonian ships descended from the sky, their ominous forms blotting out the stars. Xylos's voice boomed across the planet, transmitted through every electronic device. "Humans, your resistance ends today. Surrender now, or face annihilation." The response came not in words, but in action. As if rehearsed, millions of humans worldwide simultaneously switched on every electronic device they owned, creating a cacophony of noise that drowned out Xylos's ultimatum. It was a simple act, but it sent a clear message: Earth would not go quietly. The battle began in earnest as Zarkonian forces launched a coordinated global assault. This time, they came prepared for human ingenuity, their troops equipped with countermeasures against the improvised weapons that had proved so effective before. But humanity had prepared as well. In New York, the resistance had turned the city's vast subway system into a labyrinth of traps and ambush points. Led by former subway engineer Ray Hernandez, they used their intimate knowledge of the underground to run circles around the invaders. "They may have fancy tech," Ray shouted over the din of battle, "but they don't know these tunnels like we do." Above ground, the streets had been transformed into a gauntlet of obstacles and hazards. Every window potentially hid a sniper. Every alley could be an ambush point. The Zarkonians found themselves fighting not just humans, but the very city itself. In London, the resistance had a surprise waiting. As Zarkonian troops marched down the Thames, the river suddenly erupted. Dr. Emily Watson, a marine biologist, had spent days training a pod of dolphins to plant explosives on the hulls of alien ships. The resulting chain of explosions sent shockwaves through the Zarkonian ranks. But it was in Tokyo that the tide truly began to turn. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, a robotics expert, unveiled Japan's secret weapon, an army of repurposed industrial robots, each one piloted by a human operator. These machines, built for construction and manufacturing, had been hastily outfitted with scavenged alien weaponry. The sight of familiar human machines wielding alien technology threw the Zarkonians into disarray. Their tactics, designed to counter human biology, proved less effective against these hybrid creations. As the battle raged, Sarah Chen, the hacker from Seattle, made a breakthrough. Hidden in a fortified server farm, she managed to fully crack the Zarkonian communication encryption. Suddenly, the Resistance had access to the Invaders' battle plans in real time. "They're not invincible," Sarah's voice crackled over the Resistance network. "They're confused, disorganized. They don't understand why their superior technology isn't winning the war for them." This intelligence proved crucial. Armed with knowledge of Zarkonian movements, the human forces began to turn the tables. In Rio de Janeiro, a team led by capoeira master Carlos Oliveira used the aliens' own tactics against them, luring them into a canyon where they were ambushed from all sides. As the day wore on, reports of human victories began to pour in from around the globe. In Moscow, a group of physicists had managed to reverse engineer Zarkonian force field technology, creating safe zones where humans could regroup and plan their next moves. In Sydney, surfers used their knowledge of ocean currents to sabotage the aliens' offshore facilities. On his command ship, Carlos watched in disbelief as his invasion force was slowly but surely pushed back. "How is this possible?" he demanded, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "They're savages, primitives." Vexus, monitoring the battle reports, turned to her commander with a grave expression. "Sir, I don't think we fully understood what we were dealing with. These humans, they're unlike anything we've encountered before." As if to underscore her point, an alarm blared through the ship. A group of human fighters, using captured Zarkonian ships, had managed to breach the command vessel's defenses. Leading the charge was Jake Martinez, the former wrestling coach turned resistance leader. "You came to our world thinking we'd be easy prey." Jake's voice boomed through the ship's communication system. "But you forgot something important. Earth is our home, and we'll defend it with everything we've got." The human strike team fought their way through the ship, using a combination of alien weapons and improvised tools. They had one goal: the ship's central computer core. If they could access it, they'd have the key to all Zarkonian technology. As Silos ordered his troops to repel the borders, doubt began to creep into his mind. For the first time in his long military career, he faced the real possibility of defeat. These humans, with their resourcefulness and determination, were unlike any foe the Zarkonian Empire had ever faced. Back on Earth, the momentum had clearly shifted. Human forces, emboldened by their successes and armed with increasingly sophisticated hybrid technology, pressed their advantage. Cities that had been occupied by the Zarkonians were liberated one by one. In a poignant moment that would be remembered for generations, the Zarkonian flag that had been planted in Times Square was torn down. In its place, a simple handmade banner was raised, bearing a message in multiple languages: "Earth, not for sale." As the sun began to set on the fourth day of the invasion, the outcome of the war hung in the balance. The Zarkonians, despite their advanced technology, found themselves on the defensive for the first time. Humanity, against all odds, stood on the brink of an impossible victory. On the Zarkonian command ship, Jake and his team finally reached the computer core. As they began the process of accessing its data, Jake turned to his team with a grim smile. "Whatever happens next," he said, "we've shown them that humanity isn't to be underestimated." The fate of both species now rested on what would be found in that alien database and on the decisions that would be made in the coming hours. The war for Earth had reached its climax, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The resolution. As the fifth day of the invasion dawned, the world held its breath. The events unfolding aboard the Zarkonian command ship would determine the fate of both species. Jake Martinez and his team, having breached the ship's central computer core, worked feverishly to decrypt its contents. Dr. Sophie Durand, patched in via a hastily established comlink, guided their efforts from her lab beneath the Louvre. "We're in," Jake exclaimed as the alien symbols on the screen began to transform into recognizable data. But what they found was not what anyone expected. As Dr. Durand sifted through the data, her eyes widened in shock. This can't be right," she muttered, double-checking her findings. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the command ship, Xylos faced a mutiny. Vexus, along with several other high-ranking officers, confronted their commander. "This invasion was a mistake," Vexus declared, her mandibles quivering with emotion. "These humans, they're not the savages we were led to believe. We must end this now." Xylos, his pride wounded but his mind racing, realized the gravity of the situation. Perhaps you're right," he conceded, just as alarms blared indicating a breach in the computer core. In a twist of fate, both species were about to learn the truth simultaneously. Dr. Durand's voice crackled over the global resistance network and the Zarkonian communication channels simultaneously, thanks to Sarah Chen's hacking skills. "Everyone, listen. The Zarkonians, they're not invaders. They're refugees." The revelation sent shockwaves through both human and alien ranks. Dr. Durand continued, her voice trembling with the weight of her discovery. "Their home world is dying. This invasion, it was a desperate attempt to find a new home for their species." On the bridge, Xylos slumped in his command chair. "It's true," he admitted, his voice heavy with shame. "Our leaders thought that conquering a populated world was our only choice. I was wrong." Jake, listening from the computer core, felt a mix of anger and pity. "You could have asked for help," he said, his voice carrying to the bridge. "Humans aren't perfect, but we're not monsters. We help those in need." A tense silence fell over the ship, mirrored by a hush that spread across the battlefields of Earth. Both species stood at a crossroads. The next few moments would determine the course of both their futures. It was President Elena Rodriguez who broke the silence. Speaking from a bunker deep beneath Washington, D.C., her words were broadcast to every corner of the globe and to the Zarkonian fleet. "People of Earth and people of Zarkon," she began, her voice steady despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. "We have all suffered in this conflict, but now we face a choice. We can continue this war, which will likely lead to devastation for both our species, or we can choose another path." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I propose a ceasefire, not just an end to hostilities, but the beginning of a dialogue. If the Zarkonians need a home, let us see if we can find a solution together." The proposal hung in the air, a fragile hope in the aftermath of brutal conflict. On the Zarkonian command ship, Xylos stood, his decision carrying the weight of his entire species. "We accept," he said, his voice carrying a mix of relief and trepidation. "We will cease all hostile actions immediately." As the orders to stand down spread through both human and Zarkonian forces, an eerie calm settled over the battlefields of Earth. Soldiers on both sides lowered their weapons, eyeing each other with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. In the days that followed, an unprecedented cooperation began. Zarkonian scientists, working alongside their human counterparts, began to explore options for terraforming Mars as a potential new home for their species. Human engineers, fascinated by Zarkonian technology, worked to adapt it for peaceful purposes, accelerating Earth's technological development by centuries. The process wasn't smooth. There were setbacks, disagreements, and moments of tension. Trust, once broken, was not easily rebuilt, but slowly, steadily, progress was made. 1 month after the invasion, a historic ceremony was held in the newly rebuilt United Nations headquarters. Representatives from every nation on Earth gathered alongside Zarkonian delegates. President Rodriguez and Commander Xylos, once bitter enemies, now stood side by side. "Today, we turn the page on one of the darkest chapters in our history," Rodriguez announced. and we begin writing a new one together. We have seen the worst of each other, but also the best. Let this be a lesson to us all. In our differences, we find strength. In our challenges, we find opportunity. Xylos, speaking to a human audience for the first time, added, "We came to this world as conquerors, but we leave as friends. The people of Earth have taught us a valuable lesson about resilience, creativity, and the strength found in diversity. We are honored to work alongside you as we forge a new future together." As the ceremony concluded, a new flag was raised outside the UN building. It depicted Earth and Mars, linked by a bridge of stars, symbolizing the new partnership between the two species. The war had ended, but its impact would be felt for generations. Humanity, having faced its greatest challenge, emerged stronger and more united than ever before. The Zarkonians, humbled by their experience, began to reform their society, inspired by the human spirit they had encountered. As Jake Martinez watched the ceremony from his home in Seattle, Sarah Chen by his side, he reflected on the incredible journey they had been through. "You know," he said, a smile playing on his lips, "for a moment there, I thought we were goners." Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the image of humans and Zarkonians shaking hands and claws on the television. "It just goes to show," she replied. "Sometimes the best weapon isn't a weapon at all. It's understanding." As night fell on this new era of interspecies cooperation, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter. The galaxy watched, curious to see what this unlikely partnership would bring. For in the end, the greatest victory hadn't been won through force of arms, but through the most powerful force of all, the capacity for change, understanding, and hope. The war was over. The real adventure was just beginning.